Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, let's go. I was on this cross-country trip last year, going from the west coast to the east. As usual, I had booked my flight months in advance and splurged on a premium economy window seat. I'm a sucker for window seats, love the scenery, and I can generally handle my bladder for the duration of the flight. So I get to my seat in row 8, and lo and behold, there's a woman already sitting there. "That's my seat, I believe," I said, trying to keep things polite. She looked up at me and said, "Yes, the stewardess said I could sit here because I have a pinched nerve in my neck." I was a bit taken aback. I can't believe she would do that as I paid extra for this seat. "Let's get her over here," I replied. The woman quickly changed her tone. "Don't call her. Can't you just sit in my middle seat for the flight because of my neck? The airline didn't accommodate my disability." Now, I felt a bit bad for her, but I had paid for this seat, and it was up to her to sort this out with the airline, not me. "I'm sorry, but that's between you and the airline. I made these arrangements in advance, and that's what you should do, especially with a disability," I said, holding my ground. I pressed the call button, and the flight attendant, FA, came over. I explained the situation. This woman is seeking an accommodation for her neck, but she's in my seat. Before the FA could say anything, the woman stood up angrily. "Fine, sit in your seat," she snapped. She grumbled for most of the flight, but thankfully I had my noise-canceling headphones, so I just tuned her out. At the end of the flight, despite her disability, she jumped up and managed to retrieve her enormous carry-on luggage without any apparent discomfort. Her neck seemed to have miraculously healed during the 5-hour flight. It's amazing how many entitled con artists are out there. She was definitely one of them. Now, let me give you some more background on why I handle situations like this the way I do. I travel a lot for work, coast-to-coast meetings, conferences, you name it. Because of this, I've become quite particular about my travel arrangements. I always book my flights well in advance and have a bit of a ritual when it comes to selecting my seat. The window seat isn't just a preference, it's a necessity. It gives me a sense of control and comfort, which is crucial when you're spending so much time in the air. This wasn't the first time I had to deal with someone trying to take advantage of my seat. A few years back on a similar flight, a man had tried to pull the same trick. He claimed he had some sort of medical condition and needed the window seat. I had let it slide that time, feeling sorry for him. But when he spent the entire flight bragging to his seatmate about how he always managed to snag window seats by faking conditions, I decided never again. So when this woman tried to pull the same stunt, I was prepared. I know it might sound harsh, but I've learned that standing up for myself is necessary. These flights are long and tiring, and having a comfortable seat can make all the difference. But let's talk about the woman for a bit. She was probably in her late 40s, well-dressed, and seemed quite confident. Too confident, if you ask me. The moment I saw her sitting in my seat, I had a feeling something was off. Her excuse about the pinched nerve in her neck didn't quite add up, especially when she practically leapt out of the seat when the FA came over. The FA, by the way, was fantastic. She handled the situation with professionalism and didn't question my right to the seat. I guess they've seen it all too and can spot a faker a mile away. I appreciated her backing me up without making a fuss. As for the woman's miraculous recovery at the end of the flight, it was almost laughable. She jumped up, grabbed her huge carry-on, and marched off the plane like nothing was wrong. I couldn't help but shake my head. People like her make it harder for those with genuine disabilities to get the accommodations they need. After this incident, I've become even more vigilant about my travel arrangements. I double-check everything and make sure I have all the documentation handy. I also keep an eye on my seat from the moment I board the plane. It's a bit exhausting, but it's worth it to avoid situations like this. Traveling can be stressful, but dealing with entitled people adds a whole new layer of frustration. It's not just about the seat, it's about the principle. I paid for that seat fair and square, and it wasn't right for someone to try and take it from me under false pretenses. In the end, I got my seat back and enjoyed my flight. but the whole ordeal left a bad taste in my mouth. It's a reminder that you have to stand up for yourself because no one else will do it for you. And that's a lesson worth remembering, whether you're 30,000 feet in the air or on the ground dealing with everyday life. So, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, don't be afraid to speak up. It might be uncomfortable, and you might feel a bit like a jerk, but you have every right to what you've paid for. And who knows, maybe you'll help expose another con artist in the process. In January 2020, my friend made an unwise decision and purchased a brand new car he couldn't afford. His insurance cost was about $400 a month, and he earned around $10.25 an hour working as a shift supervisor at McDonald's. His car payment was approximately $795 a month. At $10.25 an hour, working 30 hours a week, his weekly income was about $300, or roughly $1,230 a month. This financial strain was evident. My friend approached me for help because I had experience in selling cars and knew the industry well. I reviewed his paperwork. While the dealer did overcharge him for the warranty, gave him a higher annual percentage rate, and added unnecessary extras, none of these actions were illegal. The only way to get my friend out of this deal was if something illegal had occurred. I examined his finance application, which accurately listed his income. This raised a red flag for me. No bank would approve someone for a $795 car payment if they only made $1,230 a month. It didn't add up. I searched through his paperwork for the finance application the dealer submitted to the bank. Often, when you submit a finance application at a dealership, the dealership will take the hand-filled application and reproduce it electronically. This is quite normal. However, on the application submitted to the bank, the dealer claimed my friend was the general manager of McDonald's and made $70,000 a year. My friend had good credit, so it seemed the bank didn't ask for proof of income. I accompanied my friend to the dealership and told the sales manager he should connect me with the general manager because we would be unwinding my friend's deal and returning his trade-in. Initially, both the sales manager and the general manager thought I was joking. I then demonstrated how their dealership's finance department had committed bank fraud. I showed the general manager the finance application my friend filled out and the one the dealership submitted to the bank, highlighting the income discrepancy. My friend made $14,000 a year, but the dealership claimed he made $70,000. This was bank fraud, a felony. The general manager realized the gravity of the situation. The proof I presented was undeniable. He asked, "What can I do to make this right?" I replied, "Unwind the deal and return my friend's trade-in." Unwinding the deal meant the general manager agreeing to cancel the transaction, essentially erasing it and pretending it never happened. The general manager tried to avoid this, but I remained firm, reminding him we could make his life very difficult with the evidence we had. He understood my point. My friend needed a car to get to work the next day. The general manager said he would check into it and later returned, informing us that unfortunately, they had already sold his trade-in. I responded, "That's fine. Unwind the deal and give my friend something as good or slightly better than what he traded in." The general manager asked, "So he'll buy a car similar to his trade-in?" I clarified. "No, you'll give him a car similar to his trade-in," he protested. "It doesn't work that way." I insisted, "It does when you commit bank fraud." The general manager was upset, but I reminded him I was being very reasonable, and things could get much worse, including felony charges and losing his franchise. Eventually, the general manager agreed. He looked into his inventory and found a 2007 Focus with 10,000 more miles. I declined and insisted on a car of equal or better value than my friend's trade-in. He argued, "I'm giving him a free car," and I corrected him. "No, you took his trade-in, sold it, made money on that sale, and committed a felony in selling him the new car. You are now correcting that mistake. This isn't a free car for my friend. This is you correcting your error." The general manager insisted, That was his best offer. I told him if he couldn't do better, we would consult a consumer protection attorney. Although my friend was reluctant to take this route, it was our plan B. As we prepared to leave, the general manager stopped us. "Wait, give me a second," he said. He offered a 2008 Civic with 5,000 more miles. He agreed to unwind the deal on the new car and put my friend in the Civic at no extra cost. We agreed. The paperwork was drawn up, the loan on the new car was canceled, and the dealership took back the new car, though they would have to sell it as used since it was already titled. They gave my friend a better car than the one he had traded in. For those wondering why we didn't involve a lawyer from the start, we could have. However, courts take a long time, and this was a faster way to resolve the situation. A few years back, my mom and first stepdad got a divorce. First, I was elated. My stepdad was always hard on me, and even made me depressed to a point where I wanted to die. Anyways, I soon realized that despite this, I cared for him like he was my dad. He had raised me most of my childhood along with my half-brother, his son. Anyways, that last years of their marriage, my mom and stepdad constantly got into fights. My stepdad was a mean drunk and was in complete a-hole when in a stupor. They separate but still live together while the divorce is being drafted. My mom talked to a lot of men she met online. One of them was my second stepdad. For the sake of simplicity, we'll call him Dan. Now, when I first met Dan, me, my brother, my mom, and our collie Pyrenees Cross were out for a walk along the rural canal roads. If you know, you know. Anyways, this fake blue Ford Escape pulled up looking for my mom. We get into this rando's car and go for a quick drive. He buys me and my brother chocolate milk and seems like a nice dude. He drops us off and my stepdad was rather mad. A week later, and it really hits a climax. My mom tells us boys to pack some clothes and blankets. Dan came and took us to his house where we meet his mom. The homemaker, I guess. We end up staying for a couple months. The divorce is finalized and my stepdad gets us on weekends occasionally. Well, this is where things become weird. The house he rented was very, very small. Housing 5 people in a 1-bedroom house is a pain. We end up moving into his aunt's house, which is a shithole. Dog feces everywhere. Me and my bro slept in a windowless room and barely came out. Eventually, this becomes too much once more, and my mom's mom rents us her camo trailer. We park at a park and so on. My mom gets this grueling job of newspaper delivery. For those who don't know, it's 7 days a week and at the wee hours of the morning. The whole summer was an insomniac nightmare. One night I get mad. My phone was taken for 3 months at this point. I've been the main runner for the route, and haven't been rewarded in the slightest. I ask my mom and Dan if can have my phone and he blows. He shoves me around this small camp trailer, kicking me and punching me. He even attempted to drag me outside into the sharp gravel. For a month, 6 incidents like this happen. I become depressed. I have no way to express my sadness other than to my stepdad. Least to say, he was livid. He held his tongue per my request. I feared Dan would attack my brother and my mom. Another month goes by with 1 incident, and my mom and Dan have a huge fight about some unfaithful stuff she found on his phone. The next day, his sister comes and picks him up and he flies to Oklahoma. 5 months go by. We went and moved in with my stepdad and his girlfriend at the time. Everyone got along pretty okay. My mom got with another guy who tried to fight me. He was pretty scrawny compared to a bumpkin who spent his childhood helping build sheds and move heavy stuff. Me. He leaves as well. My mom somehow gets into contact with Dan again. At first, I was livid, but she eventually ensured it wasn't going to be the same. By this point, it's 2021, early February, I think. It's been a full year since I first met him, and I'm not even done yet. Perhaps come back for part 2. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. Once upon a time, in the fabled land of New York City, when I was about 10 years old, my father and I stood at the counter of a small cafe inside Macy's. My father was placing the order, coffee I'm sure, black for him and a sweetened one for my mother, and I was leaning with folded arms on the counter's edge, with one foot bouncing by the toe on the floor behind me. This was a habit of mine, a product of my Tourette syndrome. The store was empty around us, with no other people in line or even within a stone's throw of the cafe, I remember feeling calm amid the bright glow of skylights and lightly colored merchandise displays. Then several things happened in quick succession. First, there was the feeling of someone tripping over my bouncing foot, followed by a surprised and angered, "Hey!" Finally, I felt a weak impact of clenched knuckles between my shoulder blades. Unhurt but startled, I turned and saw a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, thin almost to the point of frailty, glaring at me with an anger that quailed my goody-two-shoes heart. I was an oddly well-behaved child growing up, beloved by my teachers, prone to putting myself into timeout for crimes unwitnessed, and woefully untoughened in the face of the dark things of life. So, while today I can see in the eye of memory that this woman's anger had all the limp potency of an overcooked stalk of asparagus, at the time, I was still and afraid. The woman spoke, frantic and shrill. "You can't just do that, you can't just stick your leg out like..." Like a shot, my father's arm was out and had caught her by the upper arm. All in a flash, her face lost all its anger, along with all the color bequeathed to it by the last vestiges of middle age. Then my father spoke, and he spoke with the voice that all good men know, and which they sometimes pick up like a sword when there is warring to do and wrongs to right. That slow, stern voice in which can be heard distant echoes of the fulgurous tones that assailed Moses atop the high crest of Sinai. "My son," he began, "has Tourette's." I remember nothing more of what he said, but even now I can hear the terrible, nearly song-like cadence of those first 4 words, like the opening notes of a funeral dirge. He spoke for but a moment, and when he released the woman, she fled silently and swiftly away. The whole affair lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Though I cried in my mother's arms in the aftermath, I would not undo the experience now, even if I could, for those few painful seconds, and years of reflection since, have taught me 2 true things. That there are villains in the world, yes, but there are heroes too. To give some background, my father was a towering figure in my life. He was the kind of man who commanded respect without ever raising his voice. He had a quiet strength, the kind that made you feel safe just being around him. My mother used to say that he had an old soul, wise beyond his years. I never really understood what she meant until that day in Macy's. Growing up with Tourette's syndrome wasn't easy. Kids can be cruel, and I often found myself the target of their teasing and bullying. My tics made me different, and different wasn't something that was easily accepted. But my parents, especially my father, were always there for me. They were my shield against the world, my safe haven. My father had this way of explaining things to me that made everything seem all right. He would sit me down and tell me stories of great heroes, and how they all had something that made them unique. He made me believe that my Tourette's was my superpower, something that set me apart in a good way. He taught me to be proud of who I was, to embrace my differences rather than be ashamed of them. That day in Macy's was a turning point for me. It was the first time I saw my father in action, defending me against the cruelty of the world. It was also the first time I realized that not everyone would understand or accept me for who I was. There would be people who would judge me, who would lash out in anger and ignorance. But my father showed me that I didn't have to face them alone. As I grew older, I carried that lesson with me. I learned to stand up for myself, to face adversity with the same quiet strength my father had shown. I also learned to forgive, to understand that sometimes people's reactions were born out of ignorance rather than malice. It wasn't always easy, but it was a part of growing up. Looking back, I can see how that moment shaped me into the person I am today. It taught me resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing up for what's right. It also taught me the value of having someone in your corner, someone who believes in you and supports you no matter what. My father passed away a few years ago, but his lessons live on. I often find myself channeling his strength and wisdom, especially when faced with challenges. I try to be the kind of person he would be proud of, the kind of person who stands up for others and faces the world with quiet courage. That day in Macy's was just one of many moments that defined our relationship, but it stands out as a testament to the kind of man my father was. He was my hero, my protector, and my guide, and for that I will always be grateful. I grew up in Eastern Europe as an only child in a really poor area. My family struggled with money most of the time, even though my parents were working a lot. They did care about me, and I can't say they treated me badly when I was little. As a teen, I had less and less personal space and privacy. They came to my room without knocking. When I got a girlfriend, they called her every name you can imagine. Sometimes they argued a lot and loudly. My dad always drank a beer after work, which was not really bad in itself. However, when he was in a bad mood, he started to drink more and more. The arguments became more frequent and louder. It never escalated to physical contact between them. My dad's parents both committed suicide, his dad when he was 14, and his mom when I began first grade. Sometimes, when my dad was really drunk, he threatened to end his life the same way his parents did. I had my share of being a foolish teenager, but nothing extreme. I was never in jail or prison. At 15 years old, I started to have anxiety and panic attacks. It made me miserable, and I struggled with school and life itself. I thought I would die very young. I went to a psychiatrist for years and got medication for anxiety and depression. After a while, I stopped taking antidepressants and got a different medication. I developed an addiction to it and was on it for 3 years, frequently abusing it because I could not tolerate life. I had day-long panic attacks and overdosed twice. One time I could not move and drooled everywhere, and the other time my heart stopped for a short amount of time. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, at the age of 19, my dad got a job offer from a friend in Scandinavia. Soon after, my mom and I followed. 3 days after my arrival, I already worked in the same company as my dad. I completely quit pills. We had an $800 rent, which I covered fully 90% of the time. Bills were included. I didn't have to worry about food and appliances. That was our agreement, and I adhered to it. After I paid my expenses, they always tried to check how much money I had left, what I spent on the rest, and checked my account. They judged me if I spent on something they didn't agree with, like eating out, because food is cheaper if we make it at home. After a while, we made an agreement that I put $1,000 in savings so I wouldn't spend it, and pay the rent every month. Every month, I spent about $200 to $300 on myself at that point. After a while, I was questioned why I couldn't put that money in savings too. This drove me crazy, and I started to gamble online to have more money to spend on myself. I also developed an addiction that lasted about 2 years. I wanted something more, and got a business loan to start drop shipping. It did not turn out well, and now I have debt. I still never touched their money. The worst I did was borrow a few $100s from them for emergencies like the dentist, and I always paid them back. After a while, the company went bankrupt because of the employer, and we lost our jobs. We started to rely on social support, and filed a claim in court because our employer also didn't pay a good amount of money. I have to mention that I did, and do everything official, including paperwork, because they do not speak English or the local language. We are still on social support, which is enough for everything we have but not more. In the meantime, I learned the local language, and got to know a very sweet woman who lives in another city. They did not welcome this. She is 8 years older than me and has autism, but you could never tell. She does not require any type of assistance, has her own apartment, works, and the most noticeable thing about her autism is that she wears a beanie indoors. She is the kindest person you could ever meet and always tries to uplift me. She lives in the capital, and whenever I try to see her, my parents argue with me. They argue about her, about the costs of visiting her, and about me leaving them. We live in a small city with barely any job opportunities. I could easily get a job if I moved to her, but my parents don't let me. They say if I do, I am abandoning them, and they will have to leave because they can't get anything done due to language problems. I said I would still cover their rent, and it is still a no. They drink a lot nowadays, argue more than ever, come into my room, scream randomly, cry, and don't respect my peace and alone time. They call me names and say how ungrateful I am. After that, they tell me they only want what is good for me, and how I am not ready to move out, while I know I would be happier if I go. I have insane guilt knowing I would leave them because they really just can't get anything done. Any type of advice is so welcomed. Thank you guys. I've been away for 2 years. I kind of expected I'd be back to post one last time in 2024 because my brother went for a 4-year bachelor's degree, much like I am currently doing. For those who remember my previous posts, I'm the guy whose parents basically got reprimanded by the family for their blatant favoritism towards my older brother. Things really fell apart on my 18th birthday because my parents barely put any effort into it, while they went all out for my brother's 18th in 2020 during the pandemic. They even managed to get a DJ for his party and presented him with a car. On my 18th birthday, I got no car or even anything close to a similar party, even though my academic standing was better than my brother's. I worked hard for my parents' approval and never got it. When I asked them why my brother got a car and not me, they claimed my brother worked harder for it, which was later confirmed to be untrue when I got a bigger scholarship. My grandma happened to be eavesdropping and laid into my parents. Then she got the rest of the family involved. For the record, they were planning on getting involved anyway. My grandma just sped things up. After several family members confronted them, my parents, trying to save face, bought me a car but treated me like a spoiled kid getting a new toy when they gave me the keys. It was a late 90s Subaru, which I initially thought was great, but it turned out to have a blown head gasket barely held together with sealer. My parents treated me like I was spoiled for wanting equal treatment, and when the car broke down, their reaction was to apathetically shrug and call it karma. This caused my grandparents to intervene again and prompt another family intervention. Many people messaged me, asking if having a car was really necessary and claiming I had forced my parents into it. I forced nothing. It would have happened anyway if I hadn't asked my parents why. I genuinely needed the car. I had no way of having a job without one. My parents lived 10 miles from the nearest bus stop. I had no way of making money before college without a car, and I couldn't get rides as no one was available daily. Many people I talked to tried to impose their logic on my reasoning. Some seemed to project their own problems onto me. Then there were the outright trolls and jerks. I don't even want to repeat or remember what they said to me. Many kept up their attacks after I got the not the A** verdict, as if they had a grudge. This did not help my mental state at the time. As you can imagine, my family laid into my parents again during the intervention. By the time they were done, my parents looked like scolded children, sitting there staring at their feet. The Subaru was sold as junk, and my grandparents essentially forced my parents to buy me a better car, a Honda Civic. My uncle inspected the car thoroughly before they bought it. This time my parents did not treat me like a spoiled child. Yes, I still have the Honda, and it still runs fine. I've kept up with oil changes and the like. No accidents either. I've been a careful driver. The final straw for my parents before I left was finding out I got a better scholarship than my brother. Any excuses they previously had to favor my brother completely were nullified. They were forced to give me words of encouragement I knew they didn't mean. In wondering why they disliked me so much, I later found out from my grandma that my parents had wanted their second child to be a girl. My grandma admitted more to me later after I left for college. Before I was born, my parents were so convinced I'd be a girl that they bought a bunch of girl stuff without even checking my gender through ultrasound. I found out from my grandma about a year ago that my mother tried to raise me like a girl for the first 6 months of my life. She dressed me in girls' clothes and called me by a different name. My father enabled it all. I know it's true because my grandma showed me old family photos of me with my brother when I was an infant, and I was wearing pink in all of them. There were visible name tags with the name my parents wanted for a girl. Once word got out, my parents stopped dressing me as a girl. My grandparents told my mother that trying to raise me as something I wasn't, without even giving me a choice, was wrong. Though my family is rather old-fashioned, my grandparents are surprisingly open-minded people, and they put their foot down. So the girl treatment stopped. But instead of new clothes, they gave me my brother's hand-me-downs for years, until my grandparents noticed and did something about it. Knowing all this, my grandparents kept my childhood from being far worse than it was. They never told me until the past couple of years, and I am incredibly thankful for them. My mother apparently struggled to call me by my real name for about 2 years. Because my parents didn't get a girl, they refused to connect with me like they did with my brother, the boy they actually wanted. When my grandparents heard I wasn't getting anything new like my brother, they threatened to petition for guardianship of me. They had evidence of the various things I described. My parents couldn't stand for anything that could become a public scandal. So they stopped with the hand-me-downs and pretended to love me for a while. But as I got older, it degenerated into indifference, and maybe into hate. I'm not sure. Hate means to still care in some way, but indifference is the actual opposite of love. I just know my parents couldn't accept that their favorite son wasn't the best at everything compared to their unwanted son. Since I moved out, they've barely interacted with family. They threw themselves into work, in part because the rest of the family forced them to contribute to my college, as they did for my brother. Also, because for them, working was the only thing that gave them a reason to tell everyone to leave them alone. My grandma suspects they've even slept in their cars a few times to avoid coming home. I only saw my parents at Christmas at my uncle's house for the past couple of years, and they barely even spoke to me. Now that I was living my best life away from them, I guess you could say they'd stopped bothering to act like I was their son. They don't want me anymore, after the family humiliation they feel they suffered, even though they know they brought it on themselves. They've become workaholics that do little else. My grandmother told me my bedroom is exactly how I left it when I moved out. My parents have not even gone inside, but they kept my brother's room clean and ready for the day he'd come back home after college. Well, that didn't happen. They flew out to see him for his graduation and had a big celebration with him. I was not invited to go, not that I could afford it. But my grandparents went along and gave me the details. My parents were convinced my brother would come back home. That's when he awkwardly told them he had already secured a job through an internship he'd done the past year and found an apartment of his own. My father became furious, and my mother lost her mind, crying and begging him to come home. But he refused. You see, in the past 2 years my brother and I have reconnected a bit. He found my Reddit account and called me. He wasn't angry, he just wanted to talk. He admitted to me that our parents put him through a lot as well. Our mother absolutely smothered him, especially when I wasn't around. Our father was also quite strict with his expectations. So the fact that I did better than my brother when our parents had invested everything into him just broke them. And now they're extra broken because my brother refused to come home with them. The way our parents treated my brother is also why we stopped connecting as siblings until the past couple of years. He did bully me at times when we were growing up, but that's because being the favorite went to his head. But it was favoritism with strings attached. When he realized that, he got counseling after moving out. My brother also has a girlfriend he met in college. He kept her a secret because he knew our parents wouldn't approve. They didn't when they found out. My brother blew up at them when my mother referred to his girlfriend, whom she hadn't even met, as a bad person. My brother's girlfriend is in nursing school and a year from graduation herself. My brother says she's the best. I've never met her, but she sounds wonderful from how he's described her. My grandma told me my mother went so far as to hire a private investigator to find out who my brother's girlfriend was, and was irritated to learn she was squeaky clean, and from a good family on the same side politically. But in her mind, she was the reason my brother wasn't coming back, even though my brother made it clear he decided that before meeting his girlfriend. My father had become stoically silent about it, from what I heard. But my mother let it slip to my brother that she'd hired a detective, and my brother gave our parents a piece of his mind. This led to a whole argument about how they gave him everything, and he was ungrateful for not coming back. But he called them out, saying that being the favored child is also a form of abuse because they nearly made him like them. It broke my parents to hear that. My brother told our grandparents, and they staged another family intervention. One I was even involved in through a video call. My parents tried not to even pay attention to me, but even my brother told them to talk to me. We all told them enough was enough. They have 2 sons, and they needed to start treating us fairly. They let something as trivial as not being born the gender they wanted ruin their love for me from day one. And pardon my language on this next part, my father hit his breaking point and yelled, "You want us to admit we messed up? Well, yeah, we did. What do you want us to do? Time travel? We're paying for part of his college too. What more does he want from us?" Things ended poorly in that intervention. My mother cried that she was sorry to me, but even then, I still didn't feel her heart was in it because she didn't spend much time apologizing to me before moving on to my brother through the phone he was video calling from. She spent a long time crying and apologizing to him until he told her to go back and actually apologize to me like she meant it. That's when my father grabbed the phone and shut it off. Then he just sat down and told everyone to leave. The last thing my grandparents said to my parents was that they were so disappointed in them, and that maybe losing both sons would show them they should never have favored one. Right now, my parents are not on speaking terms with the rest of the family. My grandma heard a rumor they might be planning to move, but they have a paid-off country house and great careers. I feel like they'd be foolish to move, since my brother isn't going back, and I'm likely not either. I suppose it's not really an issue. I doubt they'd welcome me if I visited after the events that transpired. I am still thankful to them for helping to pay for my college. My student loans were significantly reduced thanks to them. But as parents, I think we can all agree they just didn't do a good job. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.